My name is Carlos Timamillo. I'm a partner at Lyra Health, which is a global advisory firm dedicated to technology and business development in the life sciences. And my role at the firm is coordinating the investment banking activities. Among my areas of focus, contract manufacturing in medical devices has definitely been one of the most active. I have sort of a privileged point of view of one who has been involved in multiple transactions in a very active ecosystem. And it's been very interesting to collaborate with Mathematic to look at really the fundamental trends that drive the evolution of the industry from the perspective of the decision maker of supply chains, the big medtech, as well as the contract manufacturers and the investment community that has brought so much transformation to the space. So without further ado, I would like to start from this macro view of the market, and start from a statement of the scale of the contract manufacturing industry. We're looking at a market of 52.9 billion in estimated value globally that is projected to outpace the growth of the medical device industry as a whole in the next 5 years. This is a fundamental trend that if we look back 5 or 10 years, we would probably see a similar trajectory. And this comes from a deliberate strategy of the medical device industry to deleverage cost inefficient, capital intensive, captive manufacturing operation in favor of outsourced vendors, and to free up resources that would benefit the dual core mission of medical device companies, which is sales and marketing and innovation of medical technologies. This decision has been driven by the tightly competitive framework of a global medtech, where companies have been operating in an increasingly consolidated and complex landscape, highly driven by innovation and interested by the convergence of the traditional technology models with emerging unfamiliar areas and capabilities like drug device combinations or digital enabled devices that are outside of their core technical competencies, as well as a restrictive global regulatory environment. So this trajectory that we project here seems to be a very fundamental, unchangeable pattern, despite the discontinuity that COVID has caused so far in 2020. And just as a note, we started developing this report with Brian before COVID hit. So it's been really remarkable to see the stakeholders react and find themselves in a completely different environment compared to a trajectory that was developing in this direction for quite a lot of time. So how is this growth in demand going to distribute across the segments of contract manufacturing? From a value chain point of view, all the phases of the product life cycle are going to see greater volumes of outsourcing. However, the largest increments are going to interest the upstream services of product development, design and prototyping, as well as the downstream portion of around the final device assembly. The central part of the flow focused on the manufacturing of components via services such as injection molding, extrusion, and other manufacturing processes. This is going to continue to be a strong, large, and fast-growing market, but definitely more mature than the other emerging areas of the value chain in terms of outsourcing. And innovation in material processing to make materials designs more performing, more biocompatible, and cheaper is going to continue to drive growth in this large staple of the contract manufacturing market. And generally speaking, we see a tendency of global medtech companies to farm out more of the entire value chain. And they will definitely favor vendors that are able to assist with the entire product life cycle and play at every phase of the product development and manufacturing. From an application point of view, we also examined different segments of the medtech market and projected areas of growth. This is a quite high level segmentation, the one that you see on in the chart to the left, that has a lot of underlying specific trends. But to simplify, we sort of highlighted three drivers, macro drivers of extra growth in particular application. One is areas of technology and markets that are disrupted by innovation and that therefore have an inherent higher than average growth profile. And the examples we bring here are, for example, molecular diagnostics, consumables in the IVD bucket, or robotic assisted surgery systems. A second area would be the group of devices that historically were manufactured in-house because, for example, of the sensitivity of the intellectual property component. But then now OEMs are starting to be more inclined to give outside to pursue efficiencies and cost savings. And then the third area is, again, markets where the traditional core competencies of the medtech companies do not allow for efficient product development or economic manufacturing. And I'm referencing again here drug device combinations and digital devices. So the CDMOs with capabilities to seize this application are definitely going to have a position of advantage compared to others that are more commodity oriented. How is the industry structured to cope with this evolving demand? The charts on this page illustrate a very diverse structure of the industry. We analyzed for this report 300 companies, more or less, with headquarters or a manufacturing presence in the US, and accounting for roughly 30 billion, 55% of the global market. And we identified three buckets. The blue bubbles here on the chart are the top 10 players, $600 million in revenue and above, global, highly diversified and integrated service providers that represent 25% of the total market. The next group of 50 companies between 100 and 600 million, so mid-sized players, make up 11.9 billion or 22.5%. But the group after that, the next 220 companies, combined for 3.8 billion. And these are small independent players with a more focused portfolio of services. So this gives an indication of a huge fragmentation and large potential for future consolidation via M&A, as well as growing competitiveness for success and survival of many of these smaller independent companies. Which brings us to examine a key trend that has interested the industry in the past decade, which is the strong trajectory of industry consolidation. Corporate acquirers, as well as financial sponsors, private equity investors, have been equally active in consolidating independent CDMOs into large, diversified, more complete platforms. And this trend is still very strong, Q1 was very active. Q2 is not referenced on this page, but has already seen some high-profile transactions, and this tendency is seems to be continuing into the next decade. The underlying strategic rationale for this is to create service providers that are better suited to meet the demand of large medtech companies that seek partners capable of ensuring scalability, quality, and a global reach, and that requires scale and a diversified set of capabilities. A particular area of focus is the activity of financial investors, which has been really an element of transformation and acceleration of this dynamic. Since the last decade, the involvement of private equities into roll-up strategies of CDMO capabilities has been impressive. But what is more impressive, in my opinion, is to see how the last 3 years, and 2019 in particular, have been the period of largest activity from private equities, and the number of new platforms that have been created or invested into in the last couple of years is unprecedented, even greater than the many successful examples of the earlier part of last decade. So this shows an incredible commitment of the financial industry to the consolidation of contract manufacturing market, and is a leading indicator of continued activity of add-on acquisition, as well as a pipeline of potential exit by strategic acquirers. So what we're going to see in the next 5 years is definitely an industry that reduces the number of its participants and is dominated by larger, more diversified global players. Which brings us to sort of some of the conclusion. This is just a sneak peek, of course, of our report. To validate this outlook, we involved the industry stakeholders, interviewed and surveyed a number of CDMOs, large medtech executives. Some of them are connected here with me today. I want to thank particularly Marie O'Malley of Medtronic, Paul Orlando of Olympus, and others who participated in our process, as well as many financial investors. And we asked them, what are the key trends that you prioritize for the industry in the next 5 years? And the consensus is definitely that the industry is bound to increase level of competitiveness among large players. And these will decline into a sort of pricing crunch, whereby vendors, CDMOs that are more differentiated from a technical point of view and are focused on innovation in material manufacturing processes and product design, will preserve the pricing power, whereas the more commoditized, undifferentiated players will inevitably suffer a decline. And the only way to achieve this type of technical differentiation is to enable innovation capabilities. And we expect a rush to integrate upstream and develop product design and development and prototyping expertise to start partnering with the OEMs early on in the process, solidify long-term relationships, and be able to offer that type of value add. And through M&A and consolidation, which we've already talked about, the industry is definitely going to become more global. And a priority of the CDMOs will be to increase their international reach, to shadow the global structure of their customers, the medtech companies, but also to emphasize and enhance time to market and simplification of logistics, which we've seen as being really impacted by COVID. And now, in conclusion, before I leave it to Brian to coordinate the Q&A, I just want to emphasize how these trends have to be analyzed and looked at in the context of the supply chain decisions of the key drivers of this change, which are the medtech manufacturers, the branded manufacturers. Yes, they will continue to rely on CDMOs. However, the supply chain decisions are very complex, global, and decided on a product by product basis oftentimes. So there will be a large variety of models that will impact the evolution of and the opportunities for CDMOs. These decisions, these outsourcing decisions, are just one pillar, one element of global supply chain. And their focus on, their goal is to enable variable cost and flexibility for the OEMs. However, what we expect moving forward, especially in the light of COVID, is greater focus on metrics of risk-adjusted return on investment for make or buy decisions. In other words, not only focus on productivity and cost reduction, but also mitigation of the overall cost, and in anticipation also of potential crises such as COVID or operational disruption. This will have an impact on the way OEMs make secondary sourcing decisions, and the question on what is the trade-off about a more redundant supply chain versus the mitigation of cost is up for debate. But for sure, contract manufacturers have a key role in this evolving scenario. And what we believe from the data we've captured is that the relationship between vendors and OEMs will continue to be strong and informed by long-term partnerships based on mutual financial incentive in the pursuit of productivity and cost reduction and innovation. So I was just up here. I will now pause and thank you for participating, and we'll welcome any question you may have, and I'm happy to dive deeper in these topics.